Look what happened to Republican Senator Mitt Romney of Utah, who was booed by delegates at a GOP, a Republican convention in his own state on Saturday.
He's a person who says what he thinks, and I don't hide the fact that I wasn't a fan of our last president's character issues. And I'm also no fan. Aren't you embarrassed?
Senator Romney was the only Republican who voted to convict Trump in both of his impeachment trials, despite the reaction. On Saturday, a vote to censure Romney failed shortly after that speech. Joe, Mitt Romney was dealing with it well enough, as best as he could, but what these people are leering and booing at is what should be disturbing all Americans.
Well, he asked the right question. Aren't you embarrassed? You know, there's a guy whose father was Republican governor. There's a guy who was a senator. There's a guy who was the Republican nominee in 2012. I remember a lot of those same people booing, those type of people, eviscerated me in 2012 whenever I criticized Mitt Romney's campaign style and talked about how he was campaigning poorly and was going to probably lose the 2012 election. It was some of the most hateful screeds I've ever seen. But they're just tribal, they're just a tribe, because now they're turning on Mitt Romney because he's actually done the right thing. He actually voted to impeach a guy who led an insurrection. But he asks the right question. Aren't you embarrassed? Because, maybe 25 years ago when I watched this tape, I would have felt really bad for Mitt Romney. But I know Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney doesn't care. He's going home. He doesn't need to be doing this. To a wife who loves him. He's going home to children and grandchildren who love and respect him. He knows who he is. And so when they boo, they don't reveal the character of Mitt Romney. They reveal the character of themselves. And you hear that and hear people acting that way. And the question from anybody that's raised in a half-decent family is, what would these people's mom and dad think of them? Were they not raised any better than that? I mean, if they have faith in God, I'm sure most of those people there would claim to be Christians. Does Jesus not teach them better than to act that way? To be that rude to a man for doing something that they know they should all do, and that is condemn what's gone on over the past 4 or 5 years. Mitt Romney, you watch this tape, don't feel sorry for Mitt. Mitt's fine. Mitt knows who he is. The problem, Eddie Glaude, is that those people that were booing in the audience and being extraordinarily disrespectful to a man who has given his public life to the Republican Party, these are the same people that booed a dying John McCain. These are the same people who booed a dying John McCain. And again, I ask the question, would their parents be proud of them? Are their parents proud of them? Listen, my parents were very conservative. Oh my God, if I acted that way in public, was that disrespectful to a man or a woman who dedicated their lives to public service? I will tell you, going home to Pensacola, Florida, that would be an ugly scene when I walk through that door. My grandmom, whoo! If she were still alive, she'd take out a switch. I mean, it really, the lack of basic values and decency is really sad and shocking, considering that this is my tribe that is behaving this way. And there happens to be the added element, as Mika just said, of it being dangerous dangerous not only for the party, but dangerous for this republic when you look around and see that they're paying fealty to a man who utterly lacks character, utterly lacks compassion, lacks decency, and is the antithesis of every one of the Beatitudes.
You know, Joe, I think that's such an extraordinary point on so many different levels. You know, the question, aren't you embarrassed, presupposes that the folks who are booing actually have the capacity to be shamed. And one of the interesting things about our contemporary political moment is the absence of shame. Right? People are doing things. They tell lies, gaslight. They do whatever they want to do. They will hold one position in 1 minute, and the next minute they hold another position. Right. So the absence of shame, right, has a direct impact, I believe, on the functioning of our democracy. And in so many ways, Donald Trump is an avatar of that absence. He has no sense of shame. He's never embarrassed by his behavior. And to echo Mika's point that you just referenced again, is that we could talk about Trump, we could talk about his impact on the Republican Party, but the broader question is what are the impacts on our democracy? How is he in some ways extending what he's done since his campaign, since his presidency, and that is undermine the deep-seated trust in our democratic process. And he's still doing it, of course, with no shame.
Hey, thanks so much for watching our YouTube channel. You can follow up on today's top stories and breaking news, or catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.